Alright then guys, welcome to the video, welcome back to the channel, and I thought I would do a video that I guess I have quite a lot of experience in, which is what it is actually like to daily drive a Civic Type R EP3. I've had this thing since 2016, so it's been quite a number of years, and I thought I would, I guess, give you guys advice if you're looking at getting one of these to daily drive like I have been for the past few years. So this video is sort of going to summarize all of the things I found that I like, that I don't like, that may put you off or not. That being said, I haven't really come from something nicer and then come backwards. Like, let's say you come from a German car that's got a nice interior and is quiet. Like, I haven't had that experience, so I guess I'm biased in the fact that I don't know what I'm missing out on, I guess, because it is a Honda, it's an early 2000s Honda, so it's pretty rattly, which we'll get into. Without further ado, let's start getting into the list of stuff that will be useful for you if you're thinking about daily driving an EP3. So I've got a list on my phone, which I'm hoping is everything you're going to want to know. If there is anything I do miss out in this video, just leave them in the comment section below. Either I will answer it, or I'm sure someone else that owns one of these will also answer it too. So first off is your MPG/general, these things on fuel. So they're not great. If you're having to do a lot of miles, I'd say it's probably not the best car for you. From factory, like a standard car is about 33 miles per gallon. That's the combined range. This is a mapped version, did some calculations. I get about 31 miles per gallon. So it's not crazy if you are thinking of modifying it and you're worried about your fuel consumption. It doesn't change that much to get all of that far more fun experience with this car. That being said, the fuel tank isn't massive. I think it's about 50 litres. What it means is if you're doing sort of mixed driving, you're probably going to get around 250 miles, which that's like driving a bit of VTEC, a bit of fun, and then just generally cruising around motorways, stuff like that. If you're going to do just a long motorway run, you can get just over 300, but obviously these are pretty low numbers when you consider some cars are doing 500 to a tank. If you're having to do big miles, might not be the car for you unless you can afford the fuel. So insurance with this thing, I mean, insurance is relative based on where you live, the miles you're going to do, how old you are, and if you've had any claims or anything on your insurance. So it is very varied. But when I first got this car, I was 22, and I think it was like 600 and something pounds, and that was through a modified car insurance policy rather than going through one of the mainstream. So would definitely advise just doing a bit of research. I'm currently with Adrian Flux, but there are multiple other companies that offer similar sort of cover. That almost halved the cost of my insurance that it should have been, because it was, yeah, looking at like 1,200 to 1,300 pounds. Obviously, you can't really take my price as whatever, because now it's obviously less as I'm older. I've got quite a few years of no claims, so obviously all of that sort of stuff factors into it as well. But relatively speaking, I think they are quite pricey if you haven't got any no claims and you're sort of under 21. These are going to be pretty expensive to insure. Road tax for these things is getting crazy. It basically goes up by at least £10 every year. I think last year I paid £360 or £370, and actually, fun fact, the S2000 is the same. It's getting pricey. I think it is now £380 or £390 at the time of recording this. I could be wrong. Based on when you're watching this, it's going to be expensive. Basically, it just goes up every single year. So definitely an expensive part of owning this thing, and it's obviously just going to keep getting worse. So now we're talking about service costs, and relatively speaking, I've been, well, touch wood, I've been very lucky with this car. I haven't really had any major things go wrong. The only thing that's ever fully stopped me was a coolant hose popping off, but I've been very lucky. But if you want to take this to Honda for a service, they basically offer two different types of service, and there's either the 12 or the 12 plus. The 12 plus is obviously more expensive. It's sort of starting around £250 for that. There are places that will do a full service for you that isn't a direct Honda. Like there is Honda HQ who offer a full service that is definitely a worthy option if you're close to them. They're based in the Midlands. This car came with a full service history, so I've decided to maintain that. It's obviously up to you whether you want to do the same or not. At my local Honda garage, actually, they say that this is the only EP3 they do get in for service. In terms of parts and things like that for this thing, it's actually one of the reasons I went for this originally, was because I knew that Honda parts were relatively inexpensive if you need to replace certain things compared to like the German competitors. That was a massive reason into why I went for this over a Golf GTI, for example. That's sort of a win for the Civic in my opinion, even though it's still dealership prices. There's also a great network of breakers and second-hand parts for this thing, as people pull these apart to take engines out and put them in other things and what have you. So you can get body parts and things like that relatively cheap, and then your general service items, pretty much everything is still available from Honda at the time of recording. There'll just be those few odd things that you can't get anymore. So then we've got the sort of general maintenance stuff that you want to keep on top of with these things. Like any Honda of this sort of generation, really, they absolutely love to drink oil. So I actually carry around a litre of oil with me at all times, because on average, I mean, this is quite extreme, but it'll do about 1,000 miles to about a litre of oil, which is a lot. Definitely worthwhile carrying some oil around, or just always be checking it. I check mine multiple times every month, even if I'm not doing crazy miles, just to make sure, because these K20 engines are pretty incredible and can take a lot of abuse, but if you don't keep them topped up with oil, they're obviously going to go bang. I use 5W40 oil in this, and I know that people are running slightly thicker. They're doing 10W40 for the higher mileage cars. Obviously, these are all starting to go up in mileage. My advice would be, actually, if you're looking at these, 100,000 miles for this car is really not that much. If it's been well maintained, there will be absolutely nothing wrong with the engine. If it's got the service history or the proof of things, work been carried out and what have you, I would not be scared by 100, 120,000 miles of this thing. My car currently has done 133,000 miles, and I've done just under 50,000 miles of this thing, and I've had no problems in the time I've owned it. And that being said, though, I have replaced the timing chain in this. Honda used to say it was about 100,000 miles you want to get that changed. They actually then scrapped that from the service manual because they found that actually it was lasting much longer than that. It's just something to be aware of. I do have a full video on my timing chain getting changed, so if you want to check that out for more info, go have a look at that. But mine, I got changed as peace of mind. I didn't need it doing. It turned out it had only stretched a little bit, wasn't too bad, and I did that around 120,000 miles. It obviously then also depends on the life that the engine's had. I knew that for the 40,000 miles that I'd owned it up to that point, it had been driven relatively hard, but not as aggressive as some people treat these engines, and I didn't have any of the telltale signs of a stretched chain, but it is something to bear in mind if it hasn't been done. So I thought I would just talk about some exterior bits of information that you'd want to know. So let's start with the tyres, actually. So the tyres I have on this are 215/45 17s. The standard wheels that come on this Civic Type R have 205s on them usually, and that is what I had as my first tyre, but I changed to 215s, and they do fit on the standard wheel, and then I've stuck with those onto these Enkei RPF ones as well, even though these are slightly wider than the standard wheel. It's a good upgrade, and I think also a 215 is a more popular tyre with other brands, which actually brings your tyre cost per tyre down, which is an added bonus, so you get more grip and cheaper tyres, which is great. I'll only touch on this point very briefly because I'm going to do a separate video on this, but the exhaust loudness, now that I have modified this car, I mean, it depends on how much you can put up with, really. I've actually got to the point now where this car is too loud. Ever since I did the exhaust on the S2000, I've just realised how stupidly loud this thing is, so that will be changing, but something to keep in mind if you are going to daily this and modify at the same time, which I assume you will, because it is a great car to modify. It can get pretty drony and pretty loud depending on what exhaust system you go for. I currently have the spoon system, and it is very loud. So the suspension on these cars from the factory is obviously a little bit stiff anyway. It does handle amazingly. You are going to feel the bumps in the road a little bit. I have this thing on coilovers, you feel the bumps more. I mean, personally for me, this is one of those things where I've never really known anything different, so I don't mind. And the benefits I gain from the suspension being the way it is, in the way that it handles, is worth it for me for the occasional bump that is a bit more violent than usual. So another thing to bear in mind if you are thinking of modifying this thing, I think it's a worthy trade-off, but if you're coming from something more comfortable, it's definitely something you need to think about. So one of the most annoying things about this car actually is the turning circle. It is absolutely dreadful. What would be a 3-point turn in a normal car is a 5-point turn in this. I believe actually it's not just a Type R thing, I think it's just all Civics of this generation had this problem. Now I do believe that this Civic was made on quite a bit of a budget by Honda, so they basically didn't really factor in an exhaust tunnel in this car, and that basically means that the exhaust sits extremely low. I can't actually remember what the standard exhaust height was like because it was so long ago, and also I guess it's less of an issue if you have standard suspension too. Once you lower this thing and it has an exhaust, it scrapes on everything. It sounds like you're bottoming out the car, but actually when you look under the car you can see just how low the exhaust sits compared to everything else. So much so in fact that I had to build a different driveway to be able to get into my driveway, and there's still scrapes even now. So there are some pretty well-known issues with these things that you definitely want to be aware of / know if you are thinking of picking one of these up. So the first one that isn't much of an issue and is generally just just a Honda thing, because my S2000 does this too, but there's a starter motor sneeze. Sounds like something's drastically wrong. There isn't actually anything wrong. Mine has been doing it the whole time I've owned this car and nothing's ever gone wrong. It does sound very horrible though, so it's just make sure you're aware of it before it happens and don't think that there is actually something majorly wrong. Also, these things are pretty well known for rusting. Common areas for these things to rust and places that you definitely want to check and then obviously maintain as you are driving this thing around is the rear arches, especially on a facelift car. This is a facelift car, so it came with carpeted rear arch liners from the factory, which the pre-facelift didn't come with. That basically saps moisture and holds moisture against the metal inside the wheel arch and rusts out that part of the car. Definitely check behind there. Also check behind the rear speakers. I have full videos on both of these areas, by the way, if you want to learn more about that. What is also linked to that is also the sill. Very, very common for rusting. I somehow got very lucky because it wasn't something that was on my radar when I bought this car. I managed to get away with it pretty much unscathed. I have a bit of rust now as it's been quite a few years that I will be looking to get sorted. And also less common and more easily replaced areas are the front and rear crash bars, but also the boot floor is known for rusting as well. So make sure you're checking those areas if you are looking at a car. Another small point that it does, I guess, kind of get annoying is that the rear brakes on these things are known for seizing and sticking. It's happened on both sides for me on multiple years. I've ended up replacing one of my rear brake calipers because of it, and I will probably end up doing the other one when that goes again. Those are all of the exterior parts I can think of, so let's move on into the interior. Okay, so we're in the interior now, and first thing I will mention actually is kind of a small thing, doesn't really matter, but the key is like 2. There is a separate key to the fob to unlock the car. That is, I guess, annoying if you have a load of keys, just takes up double the amount of space. One of the reasons why I chose this car as a daily is because it was a fun car and also pretty practical. And I suppose that is the remit of a hot hatch really, isn't it? So I guess the only downside to this over a normal Civic is that this only has 4 seats. There is no middle seat in the back, which I guess is kind of annoying for practicality if you need to move a load of people around. And obviously it's only a 3-door, so you have to move the seat forward to get people in. The other great thing about this is that the boot space is pretty massive actually. I can get a load of stuff in here. The seats fold down, they fold down pretty much flat, so you can get a surprising amount of stuff in the back of this thing, which was one of the major reasons why I wanted this car. It was a mixture of fun but also practicality. So I guess this is a point that most people bring up who haven't driven this car, and it is the gear stick placement, the fact that it is basically placed like it is a van. I guess at first it is a little bit weird, but actually it's weirder going back the other way. I actually prefer it up here for the type of car that this is. Look, I mean, I can touch the steering wheel and the gear knob with the same hand. Like, the speed at which you can move between both is, I guess, why Honda did this in the first place. It keeps you very much involved, and obviously as you're revving through the rev range, you want to be able to change gear as quick as possible to get back in that power band. This is not a negative, and do not let this put you off, because I can almost guarantee that you will start loving the placement of this thing. That being said though, if you have the standard gear knob, or almost all gear knobs apart from this one, and there are a couple of others, they will be solid metal, and obviously in the summer they'll get really hot, and in the winter they'll get really cold. I've got a Delrin based one here, so actually I don't suffer from those problems, but the standard OEM gear knob is metal, so I thought it was worth mentioning. It is amazing actually because it is weighted, does feel nice to throw through gears. One of the great features, and compared to my last car that didn't have any, is that this car has 4 cup holders within this area. We've got one hidden that tucks away just here for the driver. We also then have 2 down in this center section down here, which is where your gear stick would be. So they've gained a massive load of storage space down here. 2 cup holders in there, and then we also have one just behind the handbrake that is sort of more, I guess, for the rear. That's a big win in my opinion. If you like drinks, I mean, I very rarely have a drink whilst I'm in the car, but I know that it is crucial for all of you coffee drinkers out there. One thing to note, which I guess is becoming more rare nowadays, is that the standard head unit in the car, very outdated, can't connect your phone to it or anything like that. So actually a great upgrade, and something I would recommend, because obviously putting a phone somewhere is also slightly annoying in this car. I would recommend doing a double DIN conversion, getting something with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, depending on what phone you have. That's what I've done in here. I do have a full video on the install of this one in here as well. Definitely updates the interior a lot and makes it far more livable in this modern age that we live in now. And it also means you don't have to have the phone up here, and you can sort of hide it away in the cubby hole down at the bottom. So I would recommend upgrading to this, which isn't too expensive, but worth noting if you're expecting a bit of tech. back in the car. Now, something that I alluded to in the intro is obviously the plastic interior of this thing does shake and rattle, especially with the modifications I've done to this car. I've got gearbox mounts, engine mounts, obviously the coilovers, everything. So I have a lot more rattles than I suppose you would do if you had just a standard car, but it's something worth mentioning if you are wanting that quiet, comfortable sort of experience whilst driving. This car isn't really going to give it to you, but it's not also really what this car is about. So as long as you're prepared to sacrifice the interior quality, I should say, what it makes up for is the fact that this plastic stuff doesn't weigh loads, which means the car doesn't weigh loads, which means you have more fun with the car. But worth mentioning if you're coming from something that has a nice interior. As a daily, it can get pretty rattly in here. Again, something that doesn't really bother me because I know what I gain because of that, but worth keeping in mind for sure. And the last thing on the interior that could be just a me problem, not sure if this is a general EP3 thing, but the seatbelt sort of retracts really slowly for me and can just sometimes just stay out, which I guess isn't that big of a deal, but obviously it doesn't bother me that much because I've done nothing about it up to this point anyway. So that's going to do it for the interior, but let's jump outside and answer some of the questions that you guys wanted answering from Instagram. So I asked you guys on Instagram anything you wanted to know about daily driving an EP3, and I got quite a few responses. A lot of you saying or asking about the oil, which obviously I've already explained, which kind of does prove how important this is. So I'm going to run through as many questions as I haven't already answered, and hopefully this will give you guys more insight moving forward as well. Does it have aircon that works? Yes, actually, and I do have a video of me fixing the aircon on this because it wasn't working. So if you want to see how I fixed it, go check that video out. But also, these are quite common for the aircon not working because the aircon condenser radiator, it sits by the radiator and gets peppered from the front. That is usually where these things fail from. That is where mine failed from actually. So if the car you're looking at getting does have aircon, it's worth testing it to make sure it does blow cold because it could be something you're gonna have to fix in the future. These are just general. Would you drive the EP in the snow? I have actually been caught in the snow once. I was on my way to a job and got caught in a crazy snowstorm that within about 20 minutes was like a few inches of snow. It was mental. Here's a picture to show you what I'm talking about. This was like out of nowhere. So yes, I have driven it in the snow, but actually to be fair, the roads hadn't even been treated, so it's not like there was salt getting kicked up and everything. That is something to bear in mind though. These are untreated underneath from the factory, so that is hence why the rust is such an issue. So if you're looking at getting one and then keeping it long term, I would look at getting the underneath fully sealed with under seal, something I want to do with this thing as well. So how often do you need to fill it up? I mean, this is kind of depends on how many miles you're doing. I feel quite lucky that I don't have like a daily commute, so I'm not putting miles on it every day. If I do drive somewhere, I'm usually going kind of far and then it sits there for a bit. It really does just depend on what kind of driving and how many miles you are going to be doing per day. But yeah, however far 250-ish miles gets you. So many of you guys are asking about the oil, which is brilliant. Just a general one. Where did you find the Mugen center on the steering wheel? I actually just got it off eBay. It's not a real Mugen piece. I don't know if they even list it as an EP3 part anymore. If I can find one, I'll link it below. Compliments haters or even people trying to race you. I usually actually get compliments on this thing. I think it does sometimes surprise people how well it can keep up with certain cars. I've been asked whilst driving it if it's for sale, things like that, which I guess is a compliment. It's happened a few times where people do just want to race you just because they know the type of car that it is. Pulled over a lot by cops. I've never actually been pulled over by the police, so I have no experience in that. I can see how this car would bring that kind of attention if you are driving erratically, so to speak. Got to include genuine hatred for speed bumps. Now that does actually relate back to the low exhaust because that is one of the things that obviously will scrape on big speed bumps. I do try to avoid them as much as possible, have to go diagonally over some, but yeah, it is a bit of a nightmare with speed bumps. Do your bucket seats have an effect on long journeys? One thing I haven't mentioned actually is the seats in this. So I have, these are DC2 or EK9 Type R Recaro seats. I changed those from the standard Type R seats because this is not a Premier Edition. I can't actually think if I've sat in a car with Premier Edition Recaros in before anyway, but these Recaros are incredibly comfy and on long journeys actually aren't too bad. Again, a lot of people asking about MPG and people trying to race me, all that kind of stuff, which I guess comes with the nature of this car. And the last point is, what's it like on back roads? Now that is actually probably my favorite thing about this car. Apart from the engine and how fun it is to drive, the actual driving handling of this thing is amazing for a hot hatch that is so practical. And that is one of the major reasons why this thing has been such a fun daily to just drive around every day, because every time you drive it, you can have fun in it if you have the roads available. So I do absolutely love driving this thing, which I guess is why I've kept it for so long. So in summary then, would I recommend a Civic Type R EP3 as a daily driver? The answer is absolutely yes. That's why I've personally been doing it for the last few years. For me, it balances the perfect practicality of a car that you need to just get stuff around in, and the amazing amount of fun that you can have whilst chucking this thing around some B roads. I think what I'm more interested in is enjoying the car that I drive, and this car is such a blast to just smash around some B roads, but also, yeah, you can get quite a lot of stuff around, get some people around in it as well. So for me, it's the perfect all-rounder because it just ticks most of the boxes I'm looking for, really. Whether those boxes are the same for you is, I guess, up to your personal opinion. I've absolutely loved owning it, and to be honest, I hope I never have to sell it. It is one of those cars that is just absolutely amazing, and they just do not make cars like this anymore. If you can put up with the bumps and you are after more of a raw driver's car, I don't think there are many cars that are better for the price and that offer you so many different areas of practicality and performance. But like always, leave comments down below if there are any questions I have left unanswered in this video. It would be great to get feedback down below on whether this video has been useful for you or not, and hopefully I've managed to sway you into actually picking one of these things up, because you will then realize how much fun they are to drive. But that is going to do it for this one, guys. Hopefully you've enjoyed this one. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you want to see more videos with the EP3 and with my S2000 as well. I would really appreciate it if you joined me on the journey I'm going on with these cars. Still a few more bits to do to this thing, and obviously got a full build of an S2000 to go as well. So don't forget to comment down below, like this one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.